like that idea.
Have, so that they won't have to sell the land to, to enjoy it. They'll be able to keep it and put it to good use.
Hey, Brett and Curtis, I'm going to cut y'all off.
All right.
I've got 9 o'clock, and I know we've got some more people keep popping in, and out of respect for your time and our speakers, I'm going to go ahead and try to get started with a little introduction before Michael Cook goes on. I'm Shane McLennan. I'm the ag agent from McLennan County. Glad y'all could join us today. Pretty day outside, and we're all stuck in here visiting, but pretty weather for us to get into once we leave this educational program. So I wanted to say a few words first about just Central Texas Vines and Wines program. We've got a group of horticulture enthusiasts here in Central Texas. Some of them are on the McLennan County Extension Horticulture Committee. And it was through some of their involvement in that horticulture committee that they mentioned a group that gets together and talks about growing grapes, vine growth, and just, hashing out problems. They were a pretty good group, real progressive, positive, supporting each other. And I thought, well, I want to hear more about this and get to know these people. And long story short, we started hosting the Central Texas Vines and Wines. Curtis and Mary Timmons hosted the first one. Mike and Lloyd Latimer hosted the second one. And this year we wanted to go back to Curtis and Mary's, as they have their wine tasting room set up and working. They host a lot of people there at Lorena, Country Spring Vineyard, and a really pretty place. Curtis and Mary have done an excellent job there. And they like to talk and share information and just support other people. So really good people, big hearts, and like having them involved in this program. So I feel very unfortunate that we can't go out there and show you Curtis and Mary's beautiful place, but glad that they are still involved in this, and we can get some information out there. Curtis and Mary Timmons, like I mentioned, Mike and Lori Latimer, Fran Pontash, Extension Viticulturist, critical for this program to work. And this year we brought in Justin Meckel. Justin has an ag background, farm boy, ag kid, and he's going to grow grapes. So Justin was on earlier, was talking about their planning that they've done in their location, and I was ribbing him, giving him a hard time about hosting Vines and Wines in the future. And what he doesn't know is I was serious. But glad to have that group involved and helping plan this. So I want to remind everybody this is an educational program, and I'm going to mute everybody during the program. If I hear some background noise and such, don't be offended. I'm just muting that so everybody can listen and hear. Keep your questions to the end if you don't mind. I'll be watching the text chat, so if you have a question, please ask it or type it into that text chat, and then I'll remind our speaker at the end of their program that you have a question. I will be sending out an evaluation later on today after this program. Please reply and answer that evaluation. That's very useful information that we can record, manage the growth, and see, the impact of grapes here in Central Texas, as well as helping us plan these programs for later on. Just a reminder on today's program of what our agenda is, and I apologize, I'm used to working on a couple different screens in front of me, and I got to the office and we had no electricity, so I'm doing this from a little cubby hole at home. But our program today, Michael Cook will open up with Grape Industry and Impact to Texas. Fran will follow that with Basics of Vineyard Establishment, and Curtis has a presentation on Basic Grape 101. Fran's going to follow that with Everyday Vineyard Management. Again, we'd much rather be out in the vineyard doing this, but we're making the best of a situation, best that we can. With that, thank you again for being on here. If you get kicked off, have technical difficulties, get back on. And if there's a big problem, then we are recording this, and I will make this available to everyone. Curtis mentioned an important point. I will be sending out handouts from Curtis and some PowerPoints from all of our speakers later on. and you'll have access to that information. So with that, I'm going to quit sharing on my screen, and I'm going to get Michael involved.
Good morning, everyone. Can y'all hear me okay?
And Michael, can you share your screen?
Yeah, can you hear me, Shane?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Good volume.
Okay, so Shane, if you can make me a co-host, because I can't share my screen currently. So you should be able to go up to my name and hit more and add co-host, I believe.
Well, it won't let me make you co-host. We'll have to make you host.
Okay.
So when you're done, if you would, send that back to me.
Yes, you bet. Okay, I am the host. All right.
Kind of scary.
I know. A lot of pressure. All right. Let's get this up. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, guys, good morning. A couple things. I want to thank Shane for putting this together, and Curtis and the whole group with Wines and Vines. This has been a privilege to be able to be a part of. My name is Michael Cook. I'll tell you a little bit more about me later. And again, like Shane said, we're Aggies, we're Extension, and we love to see you in person. So this has been a learning curve for all of us here at Extension, but I think we're making the best of it. And I'm also literally in a closet right now, recording this. So if you have any questions, like Shane said, please, you have the power to chat with us. A lot of y'all are Zoom pros. You know, I'm getting the hang of it, but we'll address all your questions today. And again, I want to thank y'all. One of the benefits, though, of being able to do this virtually is you don't have to drive, but also you can go ahead and pour that glass of wine and no one's going to know that you're drinking wine at 9 in the morning. So kick back, relax. Shane asked me to speak, kind of lay the foundation today. Some of y'all may know about our Texas history, but a lot of y'all, I'm guessing, probably don't know it as well as you should. And I didn't know anything about Texas wine history, where we started, you know, when I was just getting interested in growing grapes. And so we're going to kind of lay the foundation. So this one, you don't have to bring your notepad out. That'll be what Franz and Curtis talk. Just sit back, relax, and kind of an icebreaker, kind of showing you where we've been. So from our humble beginnings to millennial madness is what I like to call it, and you'll see why. So before we get started, I've noticed from the Zoom webinars I've done that the bandwidth is greatly improved if we all will turn off our videos. So if you don't mind, you're still going to be able to see the screen, but if you can just during the talk, go ahead and make sure you're muted and also turn off your video. Your streaming will not be nearly as glitchy. So Curtis, thank you. Shane, you may need to keep yours on, I don't know. But if you can go ahead and turn off your video, it's called stop video, then your bandwidth the bandwidth on here will be greatly improved. So I'm gonna go ahead and for a couple people that might be getting that glass of wine right now and turn off some video here. Okay, everyone is great. Good job. Thanks, guys. Okay, so again, let's get started. We're talking about Texas wine, not California wine. We're talking about what's going on in our beautiful state here. So first of all, I always like to introduce myself for those that have never heard of me. My name is Michael Cook. I am the Viticulture Program Specialist for North Texas and Northeast Texas. So y'all know the state of Texas is huge, and you can drive from El Paso to Beaumont, and you can go through many different changes as far as climate's concerned, soil, vegetation, that kind of thing. So the state's big. There are lots of different sort of growing climates. And so way back when, the Texas Wine Grape Growers Association, which is our statewide professional organization, they are our lobbying group and they help unify the industry. They offer a couple programs. If you've never been to Grape Camp or the annual conference, I would encourage you to look into joining if you put a vineyard or winery in, or even if you're just interested, you can become a friend of TWIGA, but they are the ones that lobby our legislature, and they're also the ones that help get us our funding. So with Extension, a lot of us are state funded, and Fran and I and the rest of our crew actually are funded through wine excise tax. So Senate Bill 881 was passed in 2016. This is when these program specialists positions were founded through Extension. And it is our job to provide you with the most current research-based information. So it's great. Curtis was talking earlier about finding a mentor, and that's fabulous. I highly recommend it. And pair that with your regional viticulturist. So to begin, for those of you that don't know, I just threw a big word out there, viticulture. There are two fields involved in making wine and growing grapes, and that is viticulture, as you can see up here, and that is the study of growing the grape. So that's the farming aspect. So if you're out there farming a vineyard, you're a viticulturist. And if you're interested in making wine, you would be an enologist. And so enology is the study of winemaking. And so TWIGA, the Texas Wine Grape Growers Association, realized the state is so big that they had to divide up the state into unique growing regions, as you can see here with our state in the 4 primary growing regions: the High Plains in West Texas, North and Northeast Texas, the Gulf Coast, and then the Hill Country. And so I am based out of Denton. I'm a Dallas native, studied horticulture at Texas A&M, was really interested, and this is how I got into growing grapes, or the interest in that and teaching was the beginning of learning about our wine history here in the United States, and in particular Texas. That's what kind of grabbed my attention from the beginning as a student. And then I went to California to earn a master's in viticulture and enology at Fresno State, working with $2 Chuck, so at Trader Joe's, and then moved back to Texas as quick as I could. But anyway, so if any of y'all, these boundaries are not hard and fast. This gives us an idea, but this is kind of gives you an idea of who the vineyards and wineries are in your area that are most similar to yours as far as soil and climate. And also it's going to tell you who your regional viticulturist is, because it's exciting. This is a testament to just how rapidly our viticulture and enology industry is growing in Texas, that number one, we have funding through wine excise tax. A small part of that goes to fund education for our growers and winemakers, but that we have a full team with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. We are the research-based service, with the university being the land-grant university for the state. And so no matter where you are in Texas, you have a regional viticulturist that can help you in your area with vineyard establishment and management. And so we're here to help you. So figure out who your regional viticulturist is. Most of y'all, I believe, if this is Central Texas, are going to be split between me, myself, Fran Pontash, who will be on later today. She's in the Gulf Coast, and then Bree Hogue and Jim Comas in the Hill Country. We also have Dr. Justin Shiner. He is the professor in viticulture at A&M, but also in Extension, and he leads a lot of our research projects. Now, you may be going, okay, well, we've got a lot of viticulturists, but I'm interested in wine. I've got questions about making wine. Well, we have one lone enologist for the whole state, and that is Andrea Bodazatu. If you're not familiar with her, she puts a lot of educational content out. She offers a web-based winemaking workshop, how to start a winery, a small winery in the state. And she also puts out lots of information on wine and varietal characteristics on YouTube. So I would encourage you, Dr. B Talks Wine is one of them, to check her out. We'll have some further resources later. So we're here to help, and we work with our county agents like Shane to reach you, the grower or prospective grower. If you're not sure this is right for you, we're not here to push you. We're just here to provide you with the research-based information. So let's talk about where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed as far as wine, kind of set the stage. And then we'll actually later in the day get to talk more nitty-gritty about viticulture. But again, sit back and relax on this one. So what can we do with grapes? So if you're someone in the backyard, you want to grow a grape, you can grow just about anything you want. and it just depends how much you're willing to put into it. Grapes are very high maintenance. We'll talk more about that later, but there are a lot of uses for grapes. Of course, in Texas, our viticulture industry is almost exclusively for wine use. And so when I was in California, which is the breadbasket of America, most of our nut crops and fruit and vegetable crops are grown there. Grapes, we had big industries for both wine, fresh eating or table grapes, and then even raisins. And so in Texas, our commodity in viticulture, in our wine, in our industry is for wine use. And so if you're out in East Texas or Southeast Texas, you might see a niche market for fresh eating grapes commercially, maybe at the farmer's market, and those would be the muscadines. And so muscadines are a native grape that have been approved upon, and there is a long-standing history of selling those for fresh eating. But by and large, most of the people in Texas, unless you're growing a vine in the backyard, are going to be growing vineyards for wine use. Now, you may go, what about raisins? Well, real quickly, raisins are pretty simple and straightforward as far as how they're made. If you've never thought about how a raisin's made, again, raisins are grown in arid climate, the San Joaquin Valley of California, namely, and there are two methods of making raisins. I like to say, if you're seeing raisins on your vine in Texas, it's not because you intentionally did so. And so you've got problems with disease, or maybe the vine isn't getting watered enough, that kind of thing. But there's two methods, and we'll get on to some other things. I always think it's interesting just to see how grapes are processed. But they're either harvested and laid down on mats in the sun, in the vineyard floor, that's the traditional way, or they are dried on the vine where the clusters, the cordons are cut, which cuts off the water and sugar, and they are mechanically harvested. They're sent to the factory like Sun-Maid, and they are literally just cleaned up and boxed. If you are going to buy golden raisins, the only difference there is that those grapes were treated with sulfur dioxide to essentially bleach them yellow. And so sometimes there can be some varietal differences, but typically not. Anyway, so we don't see raisins here commercially. We do see some table grapes in East Texas. People, now don't get me wrong, people have tried for decades to grow table grapes commercially. There was a big push to grow around 3,000 acres, which is half of our industry right now, of table grapes in the lower Rio Grande Valley early on, because if you could ship fresh produce from Texas up to the Northeast instead of from California, we'd have a big win on that market, but those grapes collapsed. We'll talk about that. So let's start from the very beginning about our history, where we've been. And so grapes have been growing in the state of Texas for a long, long time, thousands of years. Texas is home to 13 wild species of grapes. A lot of us are familiar with the Mustang grape, which grows in the vast majority of the state, all the way down from Houston up to Dallas and Austin, Central Texas. This is one of the most predominant, but we have 12 other wild species. Now, what's interesting is that depending on the taxonomist you ask, we have about 18 wild species of grapes in America. And so Texas has the largest repository of wild grapes in the nation. More wild grapes than California, than New York, which has a big, significant industry. So grapes, there are many grapes that love growing in Texas. They've been growing for a long time. The Native Americans obviously utilized the fruit
Well, I'm not sure what happened. I'm getting hold of Michael on his cell phone to let him know that we lost him. And it looks like we may have lost Michael completely. That's one thing about technology, that there's so much that's out of our control when we do these programs. Where if we're in person, we a lot more control. And Michael said he's getting back on, so bear with us. He just gave you a tease, got you started with all that information, and then now he's going to come back for the big info. So I hope y'all didn't have any weather damage last night. I'm hearing a good bit of damage in McLennan County on the southeastern corner from Asa to Satin, that area. We lost some corn, had some hail damage, wind damage. And there's Michael.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, guys. Internet problems. Okay, let me share my screen again. Let's see here. My apologies. I was just jib-jabbing away. Okay. Shane, if you could make me the host again, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Okay.
All right. Can you
Okay.
host now?
Yes, sir. Okay, guys. I don't know where I got cut off, but do y'all remember the last thing you heard? Was it about the Vikings, maybe?
No.
Okay, I'll start from this again real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, guys. Sorry about that. Let me turn my video off. Hopefully that won't happen again. Okay, share this. So I'll start real quick. So grapes have been grown in Texas for a long, long time, for thousands of years. We have 13 wild species of grapes that flourish across the state. Most of y'all are familiar with the Mustang grape, which is shown here. If you see a grapevine off 35 or 45 growing up, that oak tree out in the pasture, most likely it's a Mustang grape. So there are lots of grapes that actually do very well in Texas. They thrive. If you, depending on the taxonomist you ask, we have about 18 wild species of grapes in America, in North America. And so Texas has the largest repository of wild grapes. We have more wild grapes than California, than New York, than Virginia, which are big players in the industry as far as viticulture is concerned. There was so much interest in viticulture when different nations were exploring. And at first, the first account was with Leif Erikson, the Viking, AD 1000, when they were exploring the northern tip of North America. They actually called America Vinland because of all the wild grapes roaming North America. The Spanish noticed the wild vines when they landed in Florida. A little bit before the Franciscan missionaries, the Spanish moving up from South America into Texas in the 1650s. And so in the 1650s, the Franciscan missionaries, again, they were helping spread Christianity and, of course, Spanish territory with the soldiers there and the Spanish rulers. They were moving from Mexico into Texas and then up into California. So grapes in a true vineyard setting have been growing for about 100 years earlier than that of California. And these Franciscan missionaries, they were planting vines that were not native, but it was for sacramental use, right? Not for secular, have a glass of wine on the back patio use. And so we didn't see that until the 1800s, when, if you can think, who do you think, which immigrant group would be bringing grapes over into Texas around the mid 1800s? Well, there were two primary groups. Those would be the Germans and then the Italians. And so the Italians, like Frank Quaglia, coming from Mexico City, they founded a little Italian town named Del Rio. There were lots of vineyards being planted then, but also towns like New Braunfels and Belleville and Fredericksburg were being established, and these European immigrants, these Germans, were bringing, the wife and kids, they had the luggage, and they had their European grapes. And so they would bring these non-native grapes over to Texas, and unfortunately, through all the records, there were no reports of production because those grapes were not native. They didn't have pesticides, and Texas is full of things that want to get at your grapes. And so, but we did see lots of people trying again. We don't have a true table grape industry except for East Texas, and it was tried. Again, 3,000 acres of European table grapes were planted in the lower Rio Grande Valley to try to produce fresh grapes for the Northeast market. They actually built a railroad system to help truck those grapes, and those vines did not do well. And so, anyways, fast forwarding to 1833, we had Valverde Winery, which was established by that Frank Quaglia, that Italian immigrant, moved to Del Rio. Anyone know where Del Rio is? So it is way in West Texas. And he had a little more luck for a couple of reasons. The first being that it's a more arid climate, like the San Joaquin Valley in California. Not as much rain, so not as much disease, not as much vegetation, not as much, which means there's not as much host for insects and other pests. So he had a little bit easier of a time than our Fredericksburg friends, the Germans, earlier on. And so Valverde Winery is our only winery to have survived Prohibition. So in the 1920s, Prohibition shut everything down. Now, Danny Hillen, one of our viticulturists, and I, we were in Fredericksburg and we had a day. And so we actually drove out to Del Rio and visited Valverde, and we were talking. And they were the only winery that we know of to have survived Prohibition. And so there were two reasons that they survived. One of them I knew about, but I did not know about the second reason. The first reason was Frank Quaglia was a good Italian Catholic, and so he was selling his wine to the church for sacramental use. But also, just like marijuana in some states today, you could get a doctor's note for Valverde's port wine, their high alcohol, more dessert style wine, and for medicinal use as an anti-anxiety medication. And so that is another way that Valverde was able to survive. Unlike California, though, which pretty much stepped back up to the plate right after Prohibition, and their wineries were blowing and going, we didn't see a resurgence in our industry, a rebirth of viticulture and enology till around the 1970s. But I want to talk about this man right here. I kind of glazed over him, and that's because we can talk about this gentleman for hours. I'm just going to talk about him for maybe another 5 minutes. But if you don't recognize this man, I'm excited because you're going to get to learn about him right now. So this man up in the right, his name is TV or Thomas Vonley Munson. And he is really our first viticulturist in the state of Texas. So he was from Illinois, not a native Texan. He studied horticulture in Kentucky and moved to Nebraska. And he must have been bored out of his mind because he was a horticulturist. He loved fruits and vegetables. He wasn't that interested in row crops like corn and soy. And so he was twiddling his thumbs in Nebraska, and his brother moved to Denison, Texas, which is just north of Dallas on the Red River. And he encouraged Thomas to come visit. And so Thomas moved to Texas, to Denison, Texas, and in a book about him, he exclaimed that he had found his grapevine paradise. All these wild grape species that he saw in Texas really captured his attention. And so this man was really interested in the wild grapes that were growing. And at the time, there were no textbooks on what was Mustang grape and what was this grape and that grape and muscadine. And so he was integral, and he would go on horseback and he would go out in the woods and he would write down the characteristics of these wild grapes. And one of the things that he noted in the late 1800s to early 1900s when he was doing this is that these grapes, these wild grapes, did very, very well. The European or non-native grapes that were being brought over by our immigrants did not fare so well at the time. And so we noticed these wild grapes did very well. They were adapted. They've evolved over thousands of years to handle our Texas climate and soils and pest and disease pressure. But one thing he noticed too is that the fruit quality was, to put it nicely, severely lacking. So as anyone has some property and they found a wild Mustang grape or muscadine, or even maybe like Vitis cinerea, a little small BB-sized red grape, and you've eaten that fruit, you know, it's not very pleasant. It's got a little sugar, but it's got a lot of acid, even though it's purple. And it'll, you know, like Mustang grape will strip the enamel right off your teeth. It's so acidic and bitter. And so Thomas was not a big winophile. He was interested in eating a grape that was low maintenance for fresh use, so table grape. And so what this man did is he started breeding. So not only was he a taxonomist, he started breeding these wild grapes to try to improve the fruit quality. Now, he also had a nursery in Denison. He loved all fruits. And so he was very prolific in other regards, but he bred at the end of his lifetime over 60 new grapevines. Now, Curtis was talking before in the chat that he was growing Lamonto. Lamonto is a TV Munson variety that's still used today, more so in East Texas. Champanel's another one you may have seen at your local nursery. And so some of these grapes are used today, mainly though for backyard viticulture, low maintenance grapes. So he did that, so that's kind of interesting on a Texas level. We have a great taxonomist and breeder early on, but that doesn't even start to begin to name the accomplishments of this man. And so one of the things that really put him on the stage internationally, to where he gained a lot of respect and admiration, was the fact that he helped save the French wine industry from complete annihilation in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so just quickly, during TV Munson's time, there was lots of immigration going on. Lots of European grapes were landing in Virginia and in the Northeast and in Texas, New Mexico, and California. But there was interest in these wild grapes that we had in Europe. And so there was a group, namely a group of British botanists, that said, hey, these are some pretty cool grapes. Let's take them over to Europe. And so they collected these wild Texas grapes. They shipped them to the UK. And of course, whenever you're moving material, there's always a chance of introducing a new disease or pest. Well, sure enough, a little root-borne aphid called phylloxera hitched a ride on these Native American grapes and landed in the UK, and phylloxera flourished. It loved the soil, it was moving, and all those grapes had never seen it, and so they were not immune or resistant or tolerant to that soil-borne aphid. And so that was spreading all across France in particular and other parts of Europe, destroying hundreds of thousands of acres of grapes. Now that doesn't seem like much, maybe it seems like a lot. We only have about 6,000 acres of grapes in Texas. There's about 500,000 grapes in California. Over 1 million acres of grapes were lost in France at this time. And so this was a big deal. The French were getting very nervous that they're losing their prized commodity, wine. And so there were lots of people trying to find cures and remedies, lots of wives' tales, like flooding your vineyard, trying to suffocate the aphid, which isn't that big of a wife's tale. But the other one was planting a toad underneath each vine. Lots of crazy things. And to this day, there is no cure for phylloxera. It is found throughout most of Europe, and it's found also being native in the US. It's spread through a lot of parts of the United States. T.V. Munson was one of the horticulturists that had a solution, and he and others were working on this idea that, hey, if this is a soil-borne problem, we can take the grapes that are resistant, okay, from Texas or Missouri and wherever, and we can take those cuttings, we can ship them over to France, and they can graft those Texas or American roots onto the bottom, since this is a soil-borne issue, and the top can be Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Chardonnay, the beloved European varietal. That's one of the cool things about grapes, like many fruit crops, is that you can actually fuse one variety onto another. And so the roots may be one type of grape, but the top with the leaves and the shoots and the fruit are another. And so T.V. Munson was vital in being one of the guys who, with his crew and horse and buggy, collected cuttings, 15 wagon loads of sticks, and they were shipped over to France. What he noticed is that he's going, okay, well, we have 13 wild grape species, and just because they're wild grapes doesn't mean they're going to do well in every part of Texas, and especially in France. And so he selected the variety Vitis berlandieri, and a couple others from, guess what, Central Texas. And so those grapes, a lot of the soil, more Fredericksburg area is more rocky, which is similar to French soil. And so those were the grapes that he selected. There were a couple different species, but those were shipped over, grafted. And so to this day, there's no cure for phylloxera, like I said. So what we can do is we can graft a resistant rootstock, and that is still used to this day. So of course, the French loved TV Munson. He was awarded the French Legion of Honor, the highest award for a non-citizen. He was the second American to receive this designation, right behind Thomas Edison. And so a man who lived in Denison, Texas, selected grapes from Central Texas, helped save the French and European wine industry from complete annihilation. So we have a big part to play in that. So if you go to France or Italy, maybe Northern Italy, I don't know about Spain, I would assume it's there. I need to look into that, but definitely France. All the grapes are grown on rootstock to this day that originated from Texas, Missouri area. And so to this day, Denison, Grayson Community College in Denison houses the Munson Repository, the Legacy, and in a delegation from Cognac, the sister city to Denison, will visit every few years and pay tribute to the legacy of TV Munson still. So anyways, that's a bit about our Texas history. Just to show you some of these wild grapes. They are very well adapted to certain parts of Texas, and the leaves look different than the European grapes. A lot of times, if you're going to grow grapes with a rootstock, you may notice a shoot coming from the ground that looks totally different than the Tempranillo you may be growing on the top, and that would be your American rootstock. There are a lot of different morphological differences. For those that aren't familiar, Vitis mustangensis, that's the scientific name of Mustang grape. That is not the same as muscadine. People get that confused. Muscadine is a totally different grape, Vitis rotundifolia, found in East Texas. Muscadine's like acidic soil. Mustang can grow in heavy clay, can grow in poor soil, it can grow in sandy soil. But this is some differences in the berries. So these first two berries, very large, thick, leathery skin, seeded. This is a purple and bronze muscadine. Okay, those muscadine grapes. This middle one would possibly be Mustang, and this even smaller one could be a European wine grape. And so European wine grapes are traditionally bred to be very small or fairly small, because a lot of the good stuff that you want, the color, the tannin, a lot of the flavors are not found in the pulp. That's where the sugar and acid is found. The really important stuff, the color, tannin, other aromatics, are found in the skin. And so you want a lot of skin contact and surface area as opposed to pulp. So depending on if you're going to grow grapes for fresh eating or for wine, there can be differences in morphology. So anyways, okay, this is really cool. So like I said, there are a lot of grapes that grow very, very well in Texas with low inputs. This is one of them. This is Mustang. This looks like a tree. This is a grapevine that was planted in the 1930s at Fort Belknap, a historic fort near Abilene, so northwest Texas. I had the privilege of going there to help them. They have a bunch of these grapes planted, these wild Mustang grapes. They were planted in the 30s, like I said, and they were let be. They built an arbor in the 50s to help support these grapes, and kids, when they go on their field trips or have lunch under this arbor, there's family reunions, all sorts of things. This grapevine is what? I'm an Aggie, so I don't do that. I don't do math that well. So 30, so that's about 80 years old. So this vine may not be the oldest vine that's still living in the United States, but I want to say it's definitely one of the largest. The circumference is 7 feet on this one vine. There's about another dozen of them that look like this. But this is wild Mustang, required no input. Throughout the day today and tomorrow, we're going to be talking about growing different grapes, hybrids or European grapes, and there are different levels of input that are going to be required on how high maintenance they are. Okay, this is the Munson Center in Denison. You're more than welcome to visit. You can take their non-traditional certificate programs. This is Munson's house you can tour. There's a book about him called Grape Men of Texas. You can also look at his book, Foundations of American Grape Culture. That was his book that he published during his lifetime about all the grapes he categorized and wrote about. So really interesting man. So that's our past. You can wake up now. Let's talk about where we are right now as a wine industry, okay? Just to kind of wrap our heads around this and see if you want to be a part of it. Our industry is growing rapidly. It's a great time to get involved in the wine industry. There's a lot of exciting things. And so this is a statistic from 2017. So wine in Texas is a $13 billion boost to our Texas economy. Now, Texas wine itself is not the entirety of this economic benefit, probably more like $2 to $3 billion, but wine creates a lot of tourism. It is true agriculture, and so there's that aspect. The wine is another contribution there, that the winemaking itself, okay? So we can bring quite a bit of money into the Texas economy. Now, as a whole, Texas, we are the #5 wine state in the US. So as far as acreage and number of wineries and production, we're #5. So the first, of course, is California. That is a true commodity there, grapes and wine. It's like cotton or cattle is to Texas. In California, grapes are a true commodity. Then you have Washington State, then Oregon, and then New York, namely the Finger Lakes. But we also have a lot of table grape, but really juice grape production up in the Northeast, like Welch's grape juice from Concord and other grapes. Virginia has a really long and rich history. Actually, I didn't mention it, but before grapes even landed in Texas, when the settlers were moving from England to the New World, there was a decree. I forget exactly what the decree was, the number, but it stated that every new resident had to plant 10 grapevines. And then wine was made, and that was a way to generate tax revenue back to Europe, or back to England. And so anyways, so Virginia actually, and then Thomas Jefferson was a big Enophile and a Francophile, loved French wine. And so Texas isn't the only one that has a really rich wine history. But anyways, so grapes are the most intense crop to manage. We were talking about it, or I was listening to everyone in the thread talking about grapes, and Curtis is right. Grapes are extremely high maintenance. Even if you're growing a more lower maintenance grape like a hybrid Blanc du Bois or something like that, they still overall require a lot of maintenance. And so they're even more intense to manage than pecans or peaches, which there's a lot of acreage in Texas for that, or blueberries. And so, just think of it, you're trying to tame a lianis, a wild woody vine. All it wants to do is grow up into the canopy of trees to reach sunlight. So you're trying to confine a vine that wants to grow 60 feet to a spacing of 6, 7, or 8 feet. And so it's a constant, continual battle to keep it in check. But the rewards are there, that's for sure. It's the highest value horticultural crop in Texas if you factor in wine. We have about 6,000 acres of grapes in the state. 80% of that is from 70 to 80% is from the high plains, so Brownfield, Lubbock area. There are benefits of growing, especially European grapes there, but that does not mean you can't grow grapes. Grapes are being grown in every part of the state of Texas, from the lower Rio Grande Valley to Beaumont, all the way up to Tyler, Texarkana. So just because someone says you can't grow grapes doesn't mean you should listen to them. But there are some challenges. Okay, we have about 600 wineries as of this month. Just think, 6 years ago, we only had half that. So we are booming as an industry, rapidly growing. I feel free to take a look at this. Every couple years, Twiga sponsors the USDA NASS Grape Variety Survey for the state. And the 2019 was the most recent one. And we see, of course, our vineyard acreage is increasing, especially in the hill country, but even in the Gulf Coast, in North Texas and High Plain regions. It's growing in every region. And we're seeing a shift from more traditional, what we call noble grapes like Cabernet and Merlot and Chardonnay to other grapes. We're seeing still an increase in Blanc du Bois and Black Spanish. We're going to see those Andy Walker, UC Davis, Pierce's disease tolerant European grapes on the map, hopefully in the next year or two, being accounted for. We're really excited about that. But we're seeing other grapes that are better adapted to our hot climate, like Tempranillo and Mourvedre. Those are European grapes. So anyways, we're seeing a shift in what's being grown, and we're seeing an increase in production and in wineries. So okay, the American consumer. So I said we started with humble beginnings, and it's looking good in our industry. Things are looking up. There's a lot of research going on with the university and extension. There are growers experimenting with lots of different varieties in different places and experimenting with different practices, different winemaking styles. Um, but what's really driving our industry, because that is changing as well. The number of Americans that are now drinking wine is increasing about 40%. This is from 2018. About 40% of all Americans drink wine. Okay, both men and women drink wine. I know the stereotype is that women get together on the back patio and they drink chilled wine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But 44% of men drink wine and 56% of women. So a lot of wine drinkers out there. But what's really interesting is the age bracket of people who are consuming wine. And so, of course, the baby boomers account for about 34% of wine drinkers in America. But the millennials, age 24 to 41, are really driving the industry. So millennial madness, remember the second part of my title, or what is driving our industry. And what is that? So millennials have a preference for local. They like to drink local, buy local. They like to know a little bit about where the wine came from, who was the grower. It may not mean that much in all reality, but they like the story. They want to know who grew it, how it was made. They want it to feel special and for them. They like labels. They are drawn to colorful labels, interesting descriptions. And so we're seeing that. And the other cool thing about millennials is that they are not going to go for that 2-gallon jug of Cabernet Sauvignon. They're very interested in trying new and unique things. So you've got this interesting Blanc du Bois blend. You can sell it to them. They like the story and they're interested in trying new things. So it's pretty exciting to see where our industry is headed. We're almost done. Real quick, we do have a number of what we call AVAs, or American Viticultural Areas in Texas. These are simply federally designated geographical boundaries where someone has said, hey, growing grapes in this area is very unique. And so we have 8 of them. Yeah, 8 of them in Texas. This doesn't mean you can't grow grapes if you're located in here. There are some marketing advantages I'll talk about next. And you can, it's expensive and it's lengthy, but you can petition the federal government and we can have as many AVAs as we want, as long as they get approved. So there is in the works some for some areas in North Texas and the Gulf Coast, I know right now. But the benefit is that 85% of the grapes grown must be from the AVA if it's on the label. And so it's a marketing advantage. You can put the AVA. You could also put a state if the grapes were grown on your estate, if you're in an AVA. And again, if it has the AVA name, 85% of the grapes had to have been from that area, whereas typically it's 75% if you have the name Texas on there. So a little bit of an advantage in some respects. So I know there's a lot of new growers or prospective growers, and you're going, oh my gosh, I was in Lubbock and they have 200-acre vineyards. How do I even break even in this? What's the most common business model? And for most of Texas, especially in Central Texas, that the business model that's adopted is the agro-tourism model. So most people will start off with a half an acre to an acre, maybe 2 acres of grapes. They'll farm that. They might sell their fruit and just grow grapes, and this is more of a hobby on small acreage, or they may have their wine made from their grapes by someone else, and they buy the wine back and sell it out of a tasting room, or maybe they even put in a winery and do everything. They vertically integrate themselves, and they do everything. Unfortunately, growing grapes standalone, especially if you're less than about 10 acres, is not very profitable. And so that's one of the big reasons why we see people diversifying product and going with an agritourism model. So having some grapes, people definitely, if you have a winery, they want to see, even just if it's a small petting vineyard, they want to see grapes. You might have 1 or 2 bottles that are estate, and the rest you'll buy fruit in from your neighboring vineyards or from the high plains of Texas. And then you will have live music and maybe a little cafe or a wedding venue or event center. And so anything you can do to help diversify there is a huge demand for agritourism, especially in Central Texas. That's the most common business model you're going to see. You're not going to see a 300-acre vineyard in Central Texas at this time, not even in North Texas. Okay, so there are lots of challenges. And I think Fran's going to talk about these, but these are things you need to be thinking of if you're going to grow grapes. Pierce's disease being the #1 threat to viticulture in most of the state, and then managing disease, which I'll talk about tomorrow, and then late freeze. Okay, further resources I want to promote, and I'll do this tomorrow, but we've got some great resources with Extension. If you want to learn more, there's only one book on growing grapes in Texas called Growing Grapes in Texas by Jim Comas, our colleague out in Fredericksburg. Again, the Texas Wine Grape Growers Association, you can get involved with them. They have a great website. We just published our first ever Grapevine Vineyard Pocket field guide for a way to diagnose problems, or if you think it's a problem but it's really not, to help save some money. And that is over 200 color photos from Texas vineyards for Texas growers, whether you have 1 vine or 1,000 vines. And it was put together by our extension team. It took about a year to develop, and you can get that at agrilifebookstore.org. We also have our spray guide. I'll talk more about those too later. I know I'm out of time. We've got a great website. We've put a lot of fact sheets online now, especially varietal fact sheets, like fact sheets about Blanc du Bois and Black Spanish, how you grow those, the trellis, and all that kind of stuff. They're free. We've got other information online, and then Facebook too. So with that, that just gives you a taste of where we've been, where we are now, and where we're headed. The outlook is very bright, and I welcome everyone to get involved in the industry and ask questions. Talk to your regional viticulturist like Fran or myself. Talk to your neighboring vineyards that have been around for a long time, that have experience under their belt. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next talk, but does anyone have any questions? Let me get my chat open. So David talked about Mission. Yeah, so Mission grape, there were 2 grapes at the time, Mission and Convent, that we know of. Mission was planted, it was actually, we believe, through DNA analysis, we believe that it was actually a Spanish variety. And it might have been hybridized in South America, but it was the predominant grape being grown in Southern California at Mission San Gabriel. There were millions of gallons of wine produced from that grape. And even to this day, there are a couple of vineyards. I was in Temecula that still have the original vines from one of the last plantings. Then you can buy the wine from the Mission grape. So yeah, Convent was grown down south near Brownsville, another hybrid with American parentage. I'm sorry, with a European parentage in it. So anyways, all right, guys. Shane, I'm going to make you the host here. I know I went a little bit over. Let's see here. Go to participants.
I think I still am. Because
Okay.
I went to advanced sharing and let you share.
Oh, great. Okay. Okay. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I'll see y'all tomorrow. We'll talk about disease, a fun topic.
Thank you, Michael. And Fran, we're going to get you rolled in here and going if you want to share your screen. Michael, thank you once again. A lot of good information for everyone to chew on.
What do you see?
I see your slide, but you're a little quiet.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Of course, I decided to do this from my office, my first Zoom meeting from my office, and forgot my microphone. So I'm all set up at home. Can you hear me better now?
A little better. Maybe move closer to your mic, possibly.
Okay, I'm doing that. Is this better?
Kiss your screen, Fran.
Huh?
Kiss your screen. Get close.
So my laptop
There you go.
is on one end and my screen's like 2 feet away.
That's good. That's where you want to be, right there.
Yep, we hear you good.
All righty. So I'm talking today about the basics of vineyard establishment. Whoops. Okay, let me get my keyboard here so it doesn't progress. So let me see. So most of y'all are thinking about it or whatever, but you're kind of set where you want to be. And when it's all about how suitable, if you're going to develop your land for a vineyard, you need to know, first of all, how suitable it is for growing grapes. And so first we want to establish what you have. And for some reason, my slide, there we go. So first and foremost is to look at your water quality, how much you have. That right there is the most important factor. Then you look at your soils, your climate, your topography, and your disease and insect pressure. And pretty much in that order. And I put that picture up. That is the Yakima Valley in Washington State. You can see grapevines all over the place. And that's because rather than the way we do things in Texas, we, especially when we born and raised and maybe inherit property, we know where we want to be, and that's where we want to grow grapes. So in the Yakima Valley, they have corporations. They have the Italians, Canadians, Australians buying hundreds of acres to plant grapes because of their water quality. They get river water for their grapes. Their soil is fantastic. The climate is perfect. As you can see, the topography, it kind of slopes a bit, and then disease and insect pressure is very low. Can you hear me now? Are you still having trouble hearing me?
You're in and out. I mean, I hear you, but you're not as loud as you were when you first started.
Well, I didn't change the thing. Okay, how's this?
You're better there at the end. Now you're good.
Okay, it's where I sit. So I'm actually sitting on top of my desk. Glad you can't see me. Okay, so, and this is okay. So I have to not look at my screen, but look at my computer. I think that's a problem. So let me, hold on. Scoot this baby forward. You can still hear me? Or no? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're just, you're faint a little at times.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. Okay, so we want to design to get this water, determine your water quality, and deliver enough water to last all through the season, and as if there was no rainfall, so enough to support you during a drought summer. So that's when the vines are at maximum need. They've got so many leaves and fruit, and you really have to water them very heavily. So you need to make sure you have enough water quantity to deliver to the whole vineyard. And that would require a pump of at least 5 gallons per minute per vine, and a moderate pH. There are some game changers, so that if your water quality would fall into any of these parameters, then that definitely limits you to either troubles that you need to mitigate and work around, maybe dilute your water with rainwater, or go into hobby, just grow grapes as a hobby. But the most important, I have these listed in order of importance, which the first one would be your sodium adsorption ratio of no more than 7, pH no more than 8. Look out for boron, your salinity, and hardness. So what happens when you get your water test back and your SAR isn't less than 7, it's actually 42.8, and you have acres of vines already planted. You find out your sodium adsorption ratio, which is a ratio of sodium to calcium and magnesium. I mean, there's just way too much sodium in ratio to the other two. So that affects the permeability of the soil. And then a pH not over 8, well, we got a vineyard here with 8.34, and boron, which is over the limit as well. So this vineyard actually falls out of the game. It is a game changer, but they had already planted the vines. So they're just working with it. And quite honestly, they make really good grapes. So it is possible, but it is a game changer in that all the standard viticulture procedures have to be adapted and modified to suit your limiting factors, and they are limiting, and you can expect that maybe have a shorter vine life, vineyard life, and have to replant perhaps more often. Definitely get a rootstock. This one, the conductivity and the salts are not that bad. So I would think in McLennan County and those surrounding, the hardness of your water is going to be perhaps the issues that you're going to be dealing with more. High calcium soils from your limestones, and that will affect your fertilization and watering. How do you know? Well, get your soil and water tested. I recommend our A&M lab. It's very dependable, and they do a good job. After you submitted soil, you go to their site, get your forms, and follow the directions. Call one of us if you need help, and send it in. And then do a percolation test. It's something you can do, very simple, just to see what the permeability is, just to see how the water drains from your soil. Grapevines need good drainage. So if you just dig a hole, fill it full of water, and see how fast it drains. Really, very, very simple. Just a no-brainer. And if you have different soil types, do that in each different soil types. Here's your water and soil tests that we recommend that would give you a really good picture of what your land has to offer. So if you can lay the baseline with these tests, then down the line in maybe 3 years, take another test. It helps you keep a track of how the land is changing. Some properties don't change much at all, depending on how much fertilizers they add or how many nutrients they pull out of the soil. But it can change, and after drought years, the water will change. The best time to take a water test is when you're using it the most. So that would be like August, July, no, maybe July. And then select these tests when you send it into the lab. Number 5 and 7 for soil and 3 for irrigation. Are you still having a hard time hearing me?
No, you're doing great.
Okay, good, thanks. All right, so soil, optimally, they want well-drained, good water holding capacity, and then no very low limits of boron, chloride, and sodium, the toxic elements. This soil here is the high plains, and Michael said that most of our acreage is grown in the high plains of Texas, and that they have really good conditions for growing grapes. Not most of us, the rest of the state doesn't have that perfection. This is how the water is going to travel through your soil. So if you have a sandy loam soil, you can see there's a drip emitter for a drip hose dripping water into the soil. So if you have a sandy loam, the water's going to travel a lot quicker than the clay loam. So if you're growing grapevines, let's say the roots are, just trying to give an idea, maybe on the sandy loam, the roots, when they're a year old or so, they're like within that 1 hour range. So you let it water for an hour, but then if you let it leave the water on for too much longer after that, the water's just going to fly through and you're just wasting your water. Whereas in the clay loam, you need to let it drip for quite a while before it ever reaches your roots. When it's really, really hot, the water needs to run. Just keep this picture in your head, because when it's really hot, the water will evaporate from the top. So if you haven't irrigated at the right amount of time, you might not be getting water down to your root zone. So clay needs to be watered longer and not so often, where the sandier soils are less hours, not so long, but more frequent. So, an hour, 2 hours every whatever, and then extend the hours as the vines grow, because their roots go down deeper. You need to reach those roots. Next on the list was temperature. So really what you're looking at is the dormant season minimum, the freeze, and then the dormant season fluctuations. So how hot does it get in the daytime, and then how low does it get at night? And then we have our 90-degree days followed up by a cold front that gets down to 32. Those kind of fluctuations, the vines pay a price for that, and it's the more fluctuations like that you have, the hardier variety you should choose. And then your growing season maximum, which really isn't a problem in Texas. That's more of a northern climate problem, where they need to get the vines ripened before fall comes. Well, we have a very long season. Here's a picture of what late frost will do to a vine. So last frost date, important in determining your suitability. And then avoid all the low areas. Not only is that where water is during heavy rainfall, but it's also where the cold air settles. So also you can avoid diseases, major diseases, by what you plant and where you plant. So if you are planting in our area here, then a PD tolerant variety should be selected. If you plan to go, which would be anything but the Vitis vinifera, basically, our classic grapes, Cab, Chardonnay, Merlot, Tempranillo, Viognier. They are all susceptible to Pierce's disease, and there's no cure for it. It can be managed by managing the insect, but then that demands more management on your part, so another decision to make. The other thing is phylloxera, which Michael mentioned, nematodes and cotton root rot, and they can also be avoided by fine grafted rootstocks that are tolerant to those problems. And then site selection, but they can really be a problem. Creep up and you don't know it, so you select a resistant rootstock just to safeguard your vines. There's a vector of Pierce's disease, sharpshooter leafhopper. And as you can see by the map, we are all, I believe, I don't know every name that signed up, but I think I can safely say we're all in a PD hot zone or close to it. And then the farther, more rainfall you have, of course, more prone you are to diseases. Downy mildew is probably the worst one we have during rainy seasons like we're having now. It's high downy mildew pressure. And then grapeberry moth. That's pretty much all over grapeberry moth. When you develop your vineyard, just want to camp out here a minute. And the planning and preparation, this is in years. So 1 to 5 years preparation. the bigger you go, the more you are dependent upon the outcome of this venture, the more years you better put into planning it, because it is highly intensive, and sometimes the profit margin is very narrow because of the weather. So planning is very important. There's no such thing as too much planning unless you don't outlive your plan, but that would be something else. And then it takes 1 to 3 years to get the vineyard established, get the vines up and producing. They're producing maybe half a crop, just kind of an early crop after year 3 and 4 after planting. And then full production, they're considered a mature vineyard at 5+ years. Most vineyards last, you hope they last 20 years. Usually in Texas, they start to decline after about 12 years. If there have been problems that weren't addressed, such as overcropping or canker disease or something. During preparation, just make sure you know what you have, what you're starting with as far as the land goes, and then clear it properly. If it needs any ripping or clearing, boulders, trees, all that stuff, get it all out of the way. Get everything properly ready for the grapevines, because they are truly the stars of the show here. So you want to get everything just in place for these guys. When they come, they don't have any problems. Get rid of the weeds. The trellis and irrigation, that is sort of a choice. Most vineyards outside the high plains put up their trellis and irrigation beforehand, so it's all in place. You definitely want to have water source to your vines at planting so that they have water immediately. Also, you're speaking to the choir here, but education, and plan for those expenses of continuing to learn, because there's so much to learn about grapes. It's an ongoing learning thing. I'm showing you this picture here because these guys, they're in a really, really nice location up where the Red River meets the Panhandle. Beautiful soil, water, and all that. And they ordered their vines. They usually, you want to order them a year in advance, at least, or maybe 2. And they ordered their vines. The vines arrived, and they hadn't finished clearing the vineyard of all the weeds. So they went ahead and planted the vines, all their vines. They were more worried about the vines sitting there than they were about the weeds. So that's just a little bit of misguided worry there. So these vines were all planted. The ones in the foreground and the background were all planted on the same day. They are the same vines, same variety and rootstock. The problem with the ones in the foreground is that there was the existing Bermuda grass. It was not cleared. So the root system just will outcompete a grapevine any day. And those poor grapevines never had a chance. The water and nutrients that were provided were essentially just making for a healthy Bermuda grass and did not reach the vines. So make sure you properly prepare for those vines. Give them a good start. Before you do, you might want to think about where the wine, about the grapes, because like Michael said, we're all talking about wine grapes here. A ton can make 160 gallons of wine, and 4 tons, which is, if you had 1 acre, okay, use 10, because you can easily take a 0 off and see you would get 4 tons per acre. That's kind of, maybe 2 to 4 tons is pretty standard for a vineyard in Texas, depending on what you're growing and how you manage it. So how many tons you would get, how much wine, what are you going to do with all that? So think about that before you decide how big, what are you going to do with that wine? Who are you going to, legally you can produce it 200, Michael? 200 gallons. You can
200 or 250 for a household of 2 adults.
okay, 250 gallons of wine you can legally produce for your own use, each household of 2 adults, which would be about half an acre. When you're in laying out a vineyard, we describe all things by vine spacing, which is between the vines, and row spacing. And how wide and which vine spacing you choose is based on the vigor of your site, how fertile it is or not unfertile, and the kinds of vines you choose. So grapevines are trained to either be single canopy system or double canopy. Here are 2 examples of a single canopy. So they're grown either to grow vertically upright growth, because some varieties grow upright. They prefer that. That's how they need to be managed. And you put the cordon, the horizontal structures at about waist high, maybe a little, yeah, about waist high. And then, or you can go with high cordon for those that grow downwards, the procumbent growth vines. But those would be a single canopy. And these are for low to moderate growth capacity vines, which I would say would be McLennan County. And here's the vine spacing. So if you have 1 acre, about 9 feet between the rows and 6 feet between the vines. So usually about 807. It's about standard for an acre. That many vines you would be planting and managing on an acre. If you want to go place them more closer together, of course, there's more vines per acre. But those are the most common spacings used in Texas. You have a high growth, high vigor site, which would be east. As you go east, they're capable of growing more vigorous vines, bigger vines, faster vines, more yields usually. Then you should be dividing the canopy. There's so much growth, you got to give those vines more space to grow. So you divide, you essentially have the two canopies, which is all the leaf and shoot growth. You have 2 of them instead of only 1. So here we have just 1 layer of leaves and shoots. And here we're creating 2. We kind of have like two rows of vines within 1 row. We've doubled it up. And in that case, 400 to 600 vines. You have to space it out, give more space between the rows primarily so you can fit your tractor in there. And then 6 feet is pretty standard. 5 to 6 feet between the vines is pretty standard for Texas. No longer. Some people go narrower, but 5 to 6 feet is about right. Probably going more towards 5 now, maybe. Mainly because of hail, like the hail we got yesterday. We'll damage some of those horizontal arms, the horizontal growth, and it's hard to grow them out. It's hard to train them out. So if you go a little shorter, you don't damage quite as much. When you are planting your grapevines, first of all, I didn't write it down, but get clean vines. Get vines that have no disease. Getting cuttings from a friend is not, unless you're just messing around or you just want to grow them in your backyard, that's fine. But if you actually want to make something, if you're actually wanting to produce something and do it well and agriculturally sound, then get good clean vines. That means disease-free. They've been propagated to have free from disease, and they're called certified disease-free vines, free of viruses, free of Pierce's disease, and free of anything else. So you don't know what you're carrying from your neighbor's vineyard if you just do it that way by getting cuttings. And then plant them uniformly. In this picture, you can see that the vines are planted, the hose is on one side, the wires on one side, and then the vines and their supporting stake are on the other side. So they all need to be exactly the same. If the more attention you pay to details like this in the beginning, the better off you are. It just really becomes critical, not right away, but later on. And make sure they're all, it's easy to get a few inches off while you're planting. And that doesn't seem like, again, it doesn't seem that critical in the beginning, but as the vineyard ages, it's much more critical. And make sure they're planted properly with roots going down, and give them a good stake because they end up pulling on that. Grow tubes, there's pros and cons. I like grow tubes because they keep the deer away when the vines are small. They help with the wind. And also if you have weeds popping up, you can still spray an herbicide and it'll protect them against that spray. They are a pain in the neck to put on and take off, but I think they're worth it. They can create a really hot environment, kind of a greenhouse effect. So it's important to get them off once you get all the weeds out of the way and they've grown past the top. It's important to go ahead and remove them. Maybe by August, before fall, get them off so they can harden off. Our goals, I guess. How long do I have? I think I'm towards the end. Low vigor.
You go to 10-20, but keep going.
Okay. That first year, just make sure you remove all the fruit and get those trunks up straight. If they harden off and go into fall with a crooked trunk, they'll stay that way unless you cut it back to 2 buds and start over again the following year. But whatever it hardens off that first year, if you're trying to make a trunk that first year, that's what you'll end up with. So make sure you select a shoot, the very best candidate there, and train it up straight, to be straight. A high vigor site, you may be able to develop the cordons as well. But that's if it's a high vigor site. It's not always possible. In second year, you definitely should be, you should be able to do that and develop it in stages. Grapevines need to be developed, those horizontal cordons need to be grown in increments of 14 to 18 inches, or else that will determine how fruitful your vines will be. That's a whole different topic. That's a big topic. Fir development, that is also a big topic, where you position them so that there's enough space between. The whole idea of managing where these shoots are going to grow is to make sure there's enough light and air for the fruit. We have so much disease and sun issues that you want enough airflow, and you're spraying chemicals, which you'll talk about tomorrow. You want to make sure that they can get access to all that spray, or else you won't have a crop. We have high disease issues in Texas. I don't think I want to go into that right now, but just know that these dormant buds are compound. In year 3, you'll be carrying about 50% of your crop, so you can go ahead. As each year goes, you can allow a little bit of fruit. Second year, maybe a couple clusters, depending on the vigor of the vine. In the third year, about 50% of the crop should be good. That means you remove the other clusters. remove them when they're very, very tiny, about the size of a pea. You should start dropping fruit if you have, while they're developing. You need to just cut them off, and it hurts, but it's something you need to do, or else you'll overstress the young vines. They're just young guys. Can't make them do a full grown-up's job. In year 3, while you're developing your vineyard, you're forming the canopy, the shoots and leaves. Concentrating on making sure that's trained properly, and you're thinking about how the fruit is developing and testing it, and that's possibly when you start worrying about nutrition and fertilization as well. Pest and disease control is always an issue, and so is vine training. These are just ongoing issues. And taking care of the weeds, those are ongoing all the time, not just developing vineyard issues. Mowing is usually like every week, like a lawn, keeping that the weeds down, trying to mow them before any seed heads form. And that should help. That should help so you don't have to apply herbicides quite so much. As a summary of what we're trying to do, just to pan out and look at the big picture. In year 1, if we've done all our planning, year 1 we're planting. We want good root growth and development primarily. That's our first goal in year 1. We want to have a good foundation, and then train permanent straight trunks. Year 2, we want to make sure if we didn't get it right the first year, that's okay. We go back and do it the second year and get that trunk nice and strong and straight, and then develop the cordons, the horizontal growth. In year 3, we're training the canopy, all the leaves and shoots and how they should go, and getting a partial crop. And I think that is it. So I guess if there's any questions, you can put them in the chat box, and I will give this back to you, Shane.
Was there any questions for Fran? So a lot of information and some technical information. You can put those questions in text chat. Fran will be with us for a while. And Fran, there is a question from Justin Meckel. He asked, can you expand on when you would remove the grow tubes?
Sure. Well, I guess the primary thing is that they shouldn't overwinter on the vines. That could cause galling, especially if you are growing rootstocks, grafted vines. So you want to get them off that first year. And so once like August comes around, somewhere between the 4th of July and Labor Day, you can put Labor Day as a time, but the wood starts to form around then, around fall of the first year. And you want to get those off before the wood starts to harden, because if they stay on, then the tissue stays soft and they don't overwinter very well. They are weaker. You're gonna kind of condition them for the upcoming winter. Does that answer your question, Justin?
And I am trying to get back to my chat. Hang on. In the chat box, there was a question about PowerPoints being available, and I will send those out after this workshop. I'll send the link for the evaluation, and the handouts from today will be with that link. And again, that'll be sent out later today. Due to time, we're going to go ahead and go to our next speaker. Thank you, Fran. And again, I mentioned Fran, Michael, all of our viticulture specialists the viticulturists are so important, so critical that you develop a relationship with them. They have the experience, the knowledge, the hands-on to help you work through issues, problems, and get started in a good manner, as well as when you do have a problem, it's much more economically beneficial to you to nip that in the bud as quick as you can. And knowing those good growers and those viticulturists is very important. With that, I am going to share my screen now and go to our next part of the program, Curtis and Mary Timmons. Curtis, if you want to go ahead and kick this part off.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good morning from Country Spring. I want to underline what a treasure Fran and her crew is down there. She's been to my vineyard numerous times looking at problems and concerns I've had, and they're just always there and a great support. We were going to launch this PowerPoint program from our house, and our relay tower has some sort of damage perhaps. So Sean's actually launching this. This is a kind of a self-contained. It's going to be a read along with some video clips in it. And this is my adventure of trying to put a vineyard together and trying to make this work. Part of my inspiration for this is when we had the last great conference meeting out here, and we had a wonderful presentation. And after the presentation, one of the attendees said, "Tell me, what is a shoot?" Okay, and that's just kind of where I'm at in terms of being a newbie on the block. I need to start with the basics and just help you understand what kind of experience I've had, with hopes that this helps your experience as well. So we're going to start this now. If you'll hit start slideshow from beginning, and on about the third slide, we'll start. We'll have audio contribution to this, and it'll play for 35 minutes.
All right, here we go.
Is there a way to move those boxes off of the right side of the screen?
Yeah, I'm getting rid of them.
Thank you. Is it still on play?
I'll have to get out of this and see.
Just play from current will be fine. Actually, it didn't trigger the audio. I think we have to get out and start it on like slide 3, and it'll start the audio. I don't know why it's not doing the audio. It's not working.
Okay. Okay.
Try slideshow from current and hit third again. You have your volume turned up?
I do, and this is what it did yesterday when I played it.
Okay.
From,
I'm sorry for that. Let me see if I can launch it. Can you make it where I can launch it?
Yes.
Okay. Do that, Mary. Mary's my engineer. She's gonna help me start this.
You're gonna have to
Do it, girl.
you
Don't tell me to do it.
have to pull it up on your, you have to open it on your.
One moment. Mary's got the technical know-how, and okay. Now, am I sharing this with you now?
Well, it's sharing from my screen. I can't send this presentation to you. There's music, Curtis, but there's no audio. That's the way it was when I played it at my office yesterday.
Yeah, just music.
Yeah, I can hear it on my end.
Okay, Shane, when you shared, when you pulled up the option to share the PowerPoint, at the bottom of that Zoom box, there was a place that said share audio. Was that clicked on?
That has nothing to do with audio.
There's the audio from the screen that you're sharing.
Well, I mean, when I share that screen, I hear the music.
Hey, we're not hearing the music.
Seeing a lamp black screen, yeah.
Okay, touch it from current. I go back to number 3 and then touch from current.
I think I figured it out.
All right, thank you all for your patience with this. Audio won't start unless you go back to slide 3.
Yeah, I'm trying.
There we go.
Okay.
A breeze, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed days, the dark sacred nights, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies crying, watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Lost the audio, Shane.
Take time machine. You have a canister for tape. We have staples that go in it here. 2-socket pull. Staples it together. See what it does over here. There it is. This. the so you could see the truth. And this love I have inside is everything it seems. But for now, it's only in my dreams. And I can change the world. I'll be the sun of the universe. You would think my love was really something good. Maybe if I could change the world. If I could be king, even for a day, I'd take you as my queen. I'd have no other way. And all of the rule this kingdom we have made. Till then I'd be a fool. Wishing for Hello, we're at the end of March. We're doing our finish pruning. We started our what's called trash pruning or initial pruning in December. We took off massive amounts of shoots from the vine to make them more manageable. What you do in your initial pruning is leave approximately 5 buds out here. So if you get a late to burn the leaves that are come out, the ones that are closer to the cordon, they'll still be okay. So now we're pretty much out of the risk of freeze. The last freeze in McLennan County on record is April the 14th. So we're pretty much free from that. The average last freeze is March the 14th. So what I'm doing now, Mario, I'm taking off all but one bud. Okay, you take off one bud or one shoot because that's about all the plant can handle in terms of grape production. And this is old wood that I'm cutting on, and you really don't want old wood on the plant to be very long. You want it as close to the cordon as you can, so that your fruiting zone on the plant is nice and tidy. Your fruit's easy to manage. Your canopy's easy to manage. So what I'm doing, I'm coming. You can see I left one. I don't know if Mary can get right here. There's one healthy shoot that's going to come out in the next day or two, and it's going to be fine. So, you know, when you're spacing your canopy, kind of use this method. And you can shy your fist. We've got 2 fruiting wires here. It's called a double canopy, and you can go either way. But you can see we were careful leaving a lot of extra in case of the freeze. We could just take that off now. This one's got 2. We just need 1. So here we go. We're just cutting them close, keeping them trim. We hope we don't get a late freeze this year. If we do, well, everything that's left will be burnt. We're probably down to about 10% less of risk of freeze. We've got 3,000 plants to do this way, so it's going to take us a few weeks, and it's going to be a beautiful vine in a couple of weeks. Okay.
Wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like lemon drops. High above the chimney top, that's where you'll find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebird.
gets dark, you can no longer see. Just let my love, baby, have a little faith in me. When the tears you cry, oh, you can't believe. Just give these loving arms. Have a little faith in me. 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 Your secret heart cannot speak so easily. Come here, darling. I'm a whisper star. Have a little in me. When your back's against the wall, just turn around, you will see. I will catch your fall. Just have a little faith in me. 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 I've been loving you for such a long, long time, baby. There's nothing in my time for you to have a little faith in me. Times you know I'm praying for you and me. There is no end. All you gotta do is have a little faith in me. I said, oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Strength is enough to have a little
myself, what a wonderful world. Well, I see skies of blue and clouds of white, brightness of day. I like the dark and I think to myself, the colors of the rainbow. I see differentiating and singing. How do you do? They really say, I love you. I hear babies cry and I watch them go. They'll learn much than we'll know. And I said, what a wonderful world. Everybody gonna save for themselves. Make the cooler on the pono for help the other. And when you make the cooler now, you know, it's like kind of automatic climate. You don't need to talk the stuff going to happen. You just gotta let them and the stuff just waiting when you ready. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people. Friends shaking and singing, how do you do? They really say, I, I love you, I love you. I hear babies cry and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than we'll know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. What a wonderful world.
Hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, guys. I'm sorry for the time it took to get that set up. The streaming on my computer was quite poor. I hope yours was better. And thank you. That was my time. Thank you.
We're pushing into over on to Fran's time, but I did have a question, Curtis. How long does that tape and the Duro tool, how long does it last?
I've got 5 of them. So the oldest one's probably 5 or 6 years old. You can order that tape, anywhere. It's really quite handy. After you get your small trunks secured to your rebar or your standards and your small cordones taped up, within a year or so, you're going to switch over to the heavier tape because the winds are too strong for that narrow tape. It's a quite handy tool.
It looks like it. Would you agree that flavor can be very site specific?
Flavor?
Yes, sir. Flavor of the wine.
Everything you read says it is, but you know, everything you put on the plant, everything you put into the ground, I think all of that has a flavoring. I have to put a lot of iron in mine, and some people said that's going to flavor it. So yeah, I'll say absolutely, yes.
And on the refractometer, when you're using it, and what are some factors of variance that would affect that sugar level?
Well, heat is going to have a little bit of impact, but quite honestly, it's a pretty simple little tool, and it's a pretty foolproof. And we'll start doing the readings in mid July, and rains will delay that. If you're having a extra hot week or two, that will increase the bricks. So you, and also one thing I did last year, I did my canopy thinning pretty tight on the east side, and I don't feel like I left enough leaves for it to fully ripen those grapes at the end. So we had a hard time pushing them to 24 bricks.
All right, well, thank y'all. I know that took a lot of time and effort putting that together, just taking the pictures and just compiling all that. I'm sure editing that was no easy task.
Well, this is for us newbies, and seriously, I'm going through this journey with everyone else. So if you want to start your journey, come over here and we'll walk you through the vineyard and show you what we got going on.
And I'll say it again, that's one of the beauties of this industry is there are a lot of good people that will help you, that will not only share their experiences, but help you make your experience positive, just so you can benefit off of their mistakes. So they'll tell you what they did wrong and how they would do it different. Curtis and Mary, both of you, thank you so much for sharing all that information. Fran,
Over, Shane.
no, you're fine. We started off kind of long, and that's a good thing. Fran, if you're ready, we'll share your screen and get you started to finish out today's activities. I see your slide. All right. The floor is yours. Fran, I can't hear
Sorry,
you.
I had myself muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, sorry about that. I just wanted to say I sure enjoyed that, Kurt. That was very, very nice, and what a hard act to follow. I'd like to echo a few things, like Shane just said. The industry as a whole, I mean, we want people to buy Texas wine and trust Texas wine that it'll be good. And the best way to do that is, make sure that everybody um, is able to has what they need, the knowledge they need and all that. And what is it? I forget what it is about a sinking ship. We want everybody floating and everyone doing well. We don't need any bad apples, so we're all here to help each other. I really like Curtis's keep accurate vineyard records. So keep that in mind as I go through my presentation, because I didn't have any really good slides like he did about how important it is to keep accurate records. A lot of what we do is like specific to 1 year because each year is different. And so it's very important to write that down. It might be 7 years later where you're wanting to know, what did I do when we had all that rain, or what did I do during drought that was either right or wrong, and how can I change it? They become very, very important. The vineyard management is based on the weather, the climate, the site characteristics, and and what you're growing. So all those, someone asked about the flavor, the taste of the wine, and does that depend on what you do? Absolutely, because that is what establishes terroir, and that's what is expressed in wine. That's what you're tasting. You're tasting the weather of that year, and each vintage is different because it's an expression of that year's climate. The weather that was at that specific climate, the site characteristics of that vineyard, and then the varieties, the genetic makeup of each vine that you planted. So a rootstock with the variety, with a scion of one variety might be slightly different if it's planted on the other end of your vineyard in a different soil type with a different rootstock. So they're all, it's rather nuanced, the differences at times, but there are differences, and that's what makes a lot of this winemaking and wine appreciation and grape growing so interesting and fun and enjoyable. So you can imagine in this picture, for instance, the chalkiness of those trenched vines is going to taste completely different from the vines in a flood-prone vineyard of clay and from high plains fruit. And a lot of that has to do with, it's not just the site, it's how it's managed as well. This is a list of the different management practices that are carried out throughout the year. So canopy management, that would involve all your pruning, shoot thinning, shoot positioning, hedging. Water, that's your irrigation, the system upkeep, keeping the quality going, keeping track of rainfall. A lot of that can be done, water can be done electronically with weather systems. There are weather systems. Curtis showed his with his soil sensors, and there are these weather systems that can record what the sensors read in your soil and the rainwater collected. They'll monitor the moisture after rain, after irrigation. So you can actually keep track of that electronically on your computer. There are those things available, but all that is part of the water management, and then nutrition management, which is your fertilizers, collecting tissue for analysis, which would actually read what kind of nutrition is in your vines. And then the water and weed management has to do with that as well. Floor management, that involves weed control and mowing. Crop management, crop estimation, crop thinning, all those work together. And then harvest management as well. It's a whole logistical acrobat. It's kind of acrobatic getting harvest done sometimes, with people coming in and trying to judge when the vines are ripe, and getting the trucks and all that stuff is quite an ordeal. So, and then of course disease and pest management, which is a whole book. Michael will talk about that tomorrow. But they are all involved and influence the final product. The basic concept is to manage it, to plant by block. So if you can keep a block, like it would be your irrigation. So if you can keep each block as uniform as possible. So each variety would be irrigated in one block, and the rootstocks, things like that, keep them all as uniform as possible. That way, when you're managing it, whether it's the canopy, it's the fertilizer, it's especially the water, it can be done more efficiently and easier. And the more uniform, usually that means the best. If it's easier and more efficient to manage it that way, then if that's the case, usually the quality will follow through with that. So keep it all as uniform as possible. And that would be with vine age as well. So as one vine dies, if you want to replant it, it's best to do so within 3 years. Keep them all within 3 years old of each other. Any mature vines and a new vine planted next to each other usually are not successful. Best just leave it blank until the whole vineyard is done enough time that you want to replant, or maybe you want to try a new variety and replant. But it's best not to mix vine ages within a block that are farther apart than 3 years from each other. Throughout management, these tasks are all driven by the weather, and then how the vine is developed through stages. And Curtis's video went through the developmental stages and what he was doing. So the weather would drive what you plant and which rootstock, because it would, and also your site, of course, because that has a lot to do with pests and temperature. So if you have a low frost area, or you're prone to very cold weather, you would need a variety that's more cold hardy. If you have diseases in East Texas or something, you need to choose something that's more resistant to diseases. So the weather in drier years, insect and disease pressure is not near as bad as it is in wetter years. And the weather drives how you when you apply your pesticides. There's really no such thing as a set pesticide schedule. It just doesn't exist because it depends on the weather, and that determines the need. Otherwise, you'd be just applying chemicals, just be wasting a lot of chemical, and it might not be doing the job it needs to do. Weather drives what your vines need as far as water and how much they're going to grow. It also will drive your weed growth, of course, rain or dry or drought. The developmental stages, where the plant is in its growth and development, is different insects and diseases. The vines are more vulnerable to insects and diseases at different times, and then that has to do with weather as well. But so it coincides with with the stage of the vine, such as bloom. That's right around fruit set. That's when grape berry moth sets in and becomes an issue, and you start working on grape berry moth. Black rot, for instance, usually not an issue once the vines reach veraison. You just don't really worry about black rot so much. So there are different diseases and insects that that are present and more of a problem, more of an issue at different times of the grapevine through the year. And as well as water, fertilizing, and canopy management. Those are all change as the vines develop through the year. And I'll go through that a little bit more. So, and those stages are dormancy. So we're going to feed them, water them, tend to them differently through all these different stages. Bud burst to bloom is considered the grand growth stage. That's when they're growing so fast. They're just incredibly fast, just incredibly fast. That's when they're just bursting, and usually we have a lot of rain where they grow even faster. Bloom to veraison is another developmental stage. That's when the berries are growing in size and developing in size, and very prone to diseases up until from bud burst to veraison, very vulnerable to diseases. Veraison to harvest, that's when the berries begin to ripen, and that's another whole set of priorities. And then post-harvest. these are the labor demands, kind of. So you can see from bud burst to harvest, it's 7 months of full-on work, and you can take a break once harvest is over if you don't make wine. Of course, if you make wine, then once harvest is over, then the next big jobs begin, and that would be crushing the grapes and making the wine and getting them in the tanks and then in barrels and that whole process. But as far as the vineyard goes, it's primarily bud burst to veraison is the most intense. After that, harvest to, from veraison to harvest, the actual work, varieties and things you have to do are different. You're concentrating on monitoring the fruit at that point. Still a lot of work, but you're just concentrating on the fruit for the most part. So this is kind of a repeat of what Curtis talked about. I'll say it a little differently. And I do want to say that, so Mike and Lori Latimer usually do this, or they have the last two Central Texas Vines and Wines. They go through this actually in the vineyard. So I'm trying to do right by Lori and Mike. I'm sorry they weren't able to join us today. They would have said it a little bit differently and probably more practically than I can, but I'll give you these nuts and bolts. During dormancy, we are keeping the herbicides down, and it's a time of upkeep. Just getting your maintenance done, the wires. You can't, once dormancy is over, which is usually from around Thanksgiving to spring break, there's that. I usually think in those terms because I'm a people person and I think of my family. So during that time, you need to get your trellis and irrigation fixed up, because once the vines are growing, if anything breaks, it's really not a good time to have to fix that stuff. So you do all your trellis irrigation work in the winter time. And you do your ordering as well. Try to get all your chemicals that you'll need, your planting, if you're going to be planting, and also contracts. If you want to sell your grapes, it's time, you do that before the vines start growing. You try to look for who might want your grapes. If any of you are thinking of going commercial, I urge you to take good care of what you're doing from the get-go, so you can communicate that to a future buyer of your grapes. And you can also, like Curtis did, he had all those wonderful pictures from the beginning, and that's a very good way to document what you're doing. Pruning isn't during dormancy. We have two pruning practices where you pre-prune, you get all those long shoots out of the wires early, and then come back after the last freeze and prune the rest of it. That helps a lot with the timing, because we have such a short space in Texas between the last freeze and bud break that we need to be able to prune quickly, very, very quickly. We get those north winds from Canada where there's nothing but barbed wire fences between us and Canada and succulent growth going. There's no chance for those buds. So if we delay pruning to as late as possible, then we have a better chance of having bud survival. So that way, by pre-pruning it and doing all the difficult work of getting those shoots out of the wires, anybody can do that. Your high schooler can do that for you and get that done for the skilled pruner. Then from bud burst to bloom, they are extremely vulnerable at this time. The tissue is very is succulent because they're growing quickly, and the tissue is soft, and that's when the fungi, the fungal spores come in, and the insects and things they're very vulnerable. A lot of the places that do not have as much pest and disease pressure as we do, they begin their their spray schedule much later than we do. But we have found that we need to come in much earlier to reduce the number of spores so that when the vines are in bloom and at their maximal vulnerability, and that's a picture of grapevines in bloom. Those are flowers, little individual flower clusters. They are the most vulnerable. So anything that, any fungal spores that get in on these little pedicels and the rachis here, the skeleton of the cluster, they'll rot it before harvest if they're in there. So you got to keep it really clean. We have some excellent chemicals for that are really safe. They don't get in your fruit the way we time them. They have already dissipated and decomposed by the time you pick the fruit. If we do it early, that gives them enough time. You don't have any problem with that in your wine, and it just if there's anything, it just falls out as a sediment. This is a time to apply fertilizers and manage your water. Fruit set to lag phase. That's a point. Lag phase is the point. During this time, the berries are growing in size, so they're creating more cells. The cells are filling with water, and they're getting bigger. And once they stop growing in size, it's called lag phase. So they stop growing in size, and they just sort of just don't do much for a week or so before they begin to ripen. During this time, we want to mow a lot. We need to put in, Curtis showed his fumigation system, and that's for applying the imidacloprid and his Top Guard through the drip system. The timing of that is very, very important as well. So if you did have cotton root rot issues, it would be time to put your Top Guard in as well. Both are applied in half doses, so half rates. Do half a rate around bloom, and then for imidacloprid, you do another half in 30 to 45 days. So that ensures an even coverage. For the Top Guard, it's the other half is after harvest. Managing the water a lot then. You can also get your first crop estimation. So on Pierre Elway has been doing these Facebook Live events on Tuesdays at 1, and that was, what is today? I've lost track of days. So that was Tuesday, 2 days ago, and the winemakers there said their biggest beef with growers is crop estimation, and they're not getting a reliable estimation of how much fruit they get. This can begin at this young stage where the shoots are not quite full grown. If you can do it around flowering, then you can see the clusters better, and just keep up with it. Usually there are maybe two times you would actually count every cluster, because things happen to the clusters, maybe hailstorm like yesterday. Things can happen, or maybe you need to thin it because you're wondering, maybe I have too much fruit. So you do a first one to see if you have enough fruit or too much fruit, and then again after you've thinned it, if you've had to thin or had a storm. But you begin early around bloom. Wanted to go back. Let me go back a minute. I would say, so what I advocate is if you can do as much canopy management as possible around bloom. Bloom is a very pleasant time of year. It's not hot yet. The tendrils are not grabbing the wires. They're not tough. The shoots are still pliable. You can remove shoots. That would be thinning the shoots. counting the clusters. If you can do as much of that early on, you save yourself hours upon hours of maintenance, because that it's something that needs to be done, but if you do it while it's easier and cooler, much more efficient. And it also helps the vines as well, because they're able to have a chance to make those chemical adjustments in their growth and development of the berries. Leaf removal is done around now, just to make sure they get adequate air, and if you need to remove more than just the shoots, start removing the leaves as well. And get any tips. Sometimes the tips, they grow so much that the tips of the shoots go down into and touch the ground. That can be very dangerous to your equipment. You don't want to catch that. And it also blocks the airflow, so you might want to tip that. Variation to harvest, like I said, it's usually not quite as hectic. And I mean, the other time I had to attend my daughter's wedding, in June 1st wedding, and oh my gosh, the whole vineyard got completely out of control. The wrong time. It was so out of control. It took 3 weeks to get it back under control. It was really the wrong time to leave for me, but you know, my daughter. Anyway, so variation to harvest, there are certain pests and animals that they know when fruit is going to be ripe before we do. So it's important to start protecting your fruit, whether you have a bird netting, a bird guard for the birds. They love it. They love ripening fruit, and insects. There's certain insects that will begin feeding on ripening fruit, and so that's when we shift to all eyes on the fruit. We can collect petiole samples around this time, because that shows what the nutrition, how the vines utilize the nutrition early in the season compared to late in the season. It just kind of helps you with your fertilization to fine-tune what you're applying. And of course, irrigation management. It can sometimes be a popular assumption that the vines do need to stop growing. The shoots need to stop growing to concentrate on the fruit, and they will in good balance. But to cut off the water entirely will induce drought and severely stress your vines. So you do want to keep them well hydrated during this time. Not to the point of growing, but to keep them well hydrated. We can tell what the sorry about that. So we can monitoring water needs by shoot tips, and a moisture sensor, moisture monitor. I use both, but the shoot tips will tell us a lot. If you see these tendrils on the growing shoot tip, those tendrils are far extended. Here's the tip. There's lots of space along the shoot with extended tendrils. That shows it's actively growing. That's what you want to see. That's what you want to see all through that grand growth early part of the season up until close to lag phase. As you approach lag phase, they usually begin slowing down. You can see the shoot tip. This is about what I'm seeing in the vineyard now. The shoot tip, this is not so elongated here. And the tendrils are not as extended. This is growth has actually stopped. You don't want to have it go past this stage. This would be about it. once the vine has reached where the tip is dead and the tendril tips are turning brown, you've got a drought type situation, and that means the water is not reaching the root. So if you can keep it, it's hard to reverse that. Very, very hard to reverse it in 100-degree temperatures with fruit ripening on your vines. So keep those guys well hydrated. Here's what's going on in the berries. This looks complicated, but I mean, you'll get a copy of it. Look at the bottom line here first. It's flowering. This is when they're flowers. And here's harvest. Now this is a Vitis vinifera. This is for all the vinifera varieties. And Black Spanish. Blanc de Bois is much shorter, a little bit different. But most vines follow a schedule like this. So they flower, and then about a month or two, maybe a little faster because we're in Texas and temperatures are hot, the berries are forming. So here's the size of the berries. They're growing in size. And then they hit this phase where they just stop. They're pulling in water through the xylem, and they're pulling in nutrition too, through the phloem. This is the chemical structure, this gray line here, of what the berry is undergoing. Then they hit veraison and they shift gears. So at veraison, they shift from growth to ripening. They're taking in sugar. See the phloem? That's when the sugars are accumulating through the phloem. And that's what we measure by Brix. So you can see here it starts at 4, ends at 26, and seldom do we get 26 in Texas. This is based, this is Australian. This thing, the Australians made it, but I love it. We normally don't reach 26 Brix in Texas without them turning into raisins first. We're just so hot. But 25, maybe some varieties, some years they will. But for whites, it's around here, 17, 18, 20, 21 Brix, and then the reds are 23 and up, typically. And that would represent the amount of sugars or insoluble solids they have accumulated through this process of ripening. And the longer they are here, the more flavor components they have. What's important to note, which unfortunately is not on this slide, is that the acids decrease the longer you hang the fruit. And we have a real problem with growers in Texas trying to reach these high sugar levels and leaving the fruit hanging on the vines for a very, very long time. And they kind of stall because of the heat, and they just can not always get the sugar accumulated that the winemaker might want. And in the process, the pH, the acids are falling down, and it's acids which keep the vine fresh and unspoiled. So you get severe problems when you let it hang for too long. Then post-harvest, we're worried about downy mildew. It's important to keep the canopy there as long as possible because those leaves, their whole purpose is to photosynthesize, to feed the whole vine. And as long as there's leaves, then the vines are feeding themselves. So you want a good, healthy canopy for as long as possible. And during, as they approach dormancy after harvest, they'll switch gears as well. They begin, instead of the sap going outwards and feeding the vine, the roots feeding the vine, then the sap starts flowing back down so that it's stored into the roots and the trunk during winter. Usually spray at least once with mancozeb just to keep them from getting downy mildew or black rot. Cap tan is fine too. protect them. What you don't want is any disease to overwinter on your wood, because then they'll come and it can infect your pruning wounds. When you lay open a wound at pruning, then whatever overwintered is could infect your vines there. And I think that's it. I'm ready. Any questions? If I didn't lose anyone.
So do we have any questions? Fran, I wanted to tell you, I really appreciated that slide of the developmental stages of the grape, that 10-day window. That's pretty informative. I haven't seen that.
Oh, good. Yeah. I mean, it's always a little different, but it's a good rule of thumb to know what's going on.
Absolutely. So if you have questions, our audience can type those in text chat, or we can unmute you or unmute yourself to ask the question to Fran or any of our speakers that are on. Curtis, Michael, Fran are all still with us.
Sure am.
David said no questions. This would be a good time if you have one. While we're waiting to see if there's any questions, just want to remind you, I will be sending those handouts out. Here's a question. The reduced deficit irrigation, RDI in Texas, what are your thoughts on it?
That's an excellent question. And if anyone else wants to weigh in, sure, but I'll address it first. That's a way of regulating vigor. So grapevines, the fruit development of the fruit and the fruit quality is in competition with the leaves. So there's a balance between the number of leaves, which is usually 12 to 15 leaves, are needed to support those two clusters that are on every shoot. So there's a delicate balance for nutrition and water, and too much water, you'll have too much shoot, too many green growth, and it kind of robs everything from the fruit, and the fruit has a hard time developing with too much water. So that's the background on the deficient irrigation philosophy. It's fine if you have enough water in your soil profile to kind of manage that. It's a learned technique, and it's not something for a new grower. I wouldn't advise it for a new grower. It's a learned technique. You really have to know your vines, and you need to know how your soil holds on to the moisture, and then keep track of the rain and irrigation that goes through before attempting it. And it's a quality. It's for quality, wine quality.
Right. Fran, can I add to that? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. This is Michael Cook. I want to agree with Fran, and that's a big question we get is, anything we can do to try to minimize the vegetative growth seems to be, obviously we would like to do that. That would be less work we have to do, and water and nitrogen are the two most invigorating actions in the vineyard. And so we can try to limit that. The problem is, and a lot of people think, and they've read from California, that if you stress your vines or you hold back water, the sugar is going to accumulate better, you're going to get better quality. And there's a lot of research that supports that in California, where I studied, and actually my master's thesis was on leaf pulling and regulated deficit irrigation, or RDI. And under climates where vines are happy throughout the growing season, and yes, it does get hot in Napa and San Joaquin Valley, but those vines year after year are taken well care of, and they have extensive root systems. You can implement regulated deficit irrigation, and you can see benefit both in vegetative growth and to some degree minimizing certain canopy management practices, and also an increase in phenolic concentration like color. The problem is in Texas, we're growing grapes that are not native under extremely inhospitable conditions every year. And grapes are long-term perennial crops. So what you do this year will absolutely have an effect year after year. We hope these vines will live 30, 40 years. The cordons won't. They're only good for about 10 years. But the vine itself, we want it to produce a sustainable yield of high quality fruit year after year. So what we've seen right now is that you could implement a slight deficit during early season after a fruit set, possibly. I would definitely encourage you to learn more about your soil. And if you are going to be having a vineyard, you need to be able to know how much to irrigate when every week. And so utilizing soil sensors or an EC-based model, not just guessing when to water. Like Fran said, know your soil and how it holds water. And if you are going to try, only do very, very mild and only during a very small window of time. The last thing we want to do is turn the water off in the heat of the summer thinking we're going to improve fruit quality, when in actuality we're damaging our vines, and they may produce a really high quality crop this year, but next year you're going into the game severe with very poor vines. And so it's a compounding effect. There's plenty of other things: the heat, Pierce's disease, other pests and disease, soil-borne problems that are attacking our grapes. So the long story short, what Fran said, I agree with 100%. But yeah, I would be very leery of any major deficit stress regimen.
So this is Clay, the one who asked. So I'm with Hoover Valley Vineyards, and it's a topic that comes up. Winemakers want it, and growers don't. So I'm just curious if anyone actually does do it commercially in Texas.
Yeah, sure. So there are some, and I will tell you this: when I was in Fresno, the growers, they're in the San Joaquin Valley. It's bulk wine, so they're not paid for quality. That wine's going into millions of bottles of 2-buck chuck, and so they over irrigate because that gives bigger vines, and those bigger vines can hold more fruit. The more fruit also gets filled up with water. And so they're getting lots of tonnage. They were applying 30 acre inches of water every year, which is astronomical. We were able to reduce water down to 9 acre inches. And we saw only a slight reduction in crop load and better quality because of the dilution effect. But that's under an ideal climate with very minimal stress. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you have a winemaker that's saying, listen, these research papers out of California are showing regulated deficit irrigation is highly beneficial to quality. I would consider looking at papers from hot climate, or you can talk with your regional viticulturist, and we can give you some more information. There's not a lot of research out there in Texas, to my knowledge, about deficit irrigation, because we've just seen it firsthand in the vineyard, vines crapping out and dying from growers not turning on irrigation when they need to. So I think that's going to be something that's a hot topic that is slowly, as more and more research gets put out, seeing that at this point, severely stressing your vines and holding back water, especially during ripening and in the summer, is not beneficial. So I think having that discussion is important. And from the research we've seen, that is not the case in Texas at this point. So, and we're happy to talk with winemakers too and explain that on the viticulture end.
Michael, I wanted to add something too. So there is a vineyard in Central Texas that the winemaker said, please do not water your fruit. I want those bricks high. And so they actually cut the water off, and the temperature rose to, triple digits. It was over 110 in the vineyard. And that was 2 years ago. And the vines have not really produced, or they've not recovered fully since then. I mean, it pretty well costs, I don't know how many years it's going to take, or if the vines will recover fully. But it took such a big toll on something that's not too far from you guys.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And there may be a couple isolated sites that a slight deficit could be beneficial. I'm not discounting that, but overall, you know, extreme water deficit, we're talking more than 80% returning of water that's needed through ET. From what just visually, I think that's a very bad scenario for most growers. And if it's working for you right now, it will probably start showing problems like Fran said. And I think it's just a matter of time before the winemaker goes, okay, well, the fruit I'm getting is maybe got a lot of sugar, but it's really, you know, it's got problems with other things, not a lot of aromatic characteristics. Maybe it does, but maybe the next couple of years, you're not able to give them the tonnage they want. So I think for winemakers that think that at this point, they just haven't, maybe they haven't seen the negative effects from growers struggling when they routinely stress their vines out with water stress at this point. So.
Good question, Clay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? We're out of time, but if there's another question, we can get it answered real quick. Well, if there's not any